of the ones that this is one of the ones that I don't live stream. And just like last time, if for whatever reason, truly any reason at all, if you're not comfortable with having this, unpublished, but like private link on YouTube, let me know and I won't post it. That's no problem at all. And I can just do a transcript or a list of questions or something that we talked about. So keep that in mind. And I do like to record it because I know not everybody can meet with us at this time, but again, it's not a problem to accommodate people. I also just want to make sure that nobody I'm doing negatives all wrong. I want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable being able to ask questions freely. So if, having it recorded for whatever reason at all makes you feel not comfortable asking questions, you can just let me know and this won't get posted anywhere. So some prairie stuffed stout with vanilla, cocoa nibs, and Oreos. Wow. That sounds thick and filling. Okay, so we are about 5 minutes in, and it always drives me crazy when I join a meeting and everybody's like, I'll give it a couple more minutes. So you all are here, and don't let me forget. I need to continue to keep an eye on the people who are in the waiting room, but we can get started. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for submitting your questions. If you have a beer, cheers to you. We did it. We made it through 14 weeks. Okay, so as I mentioned, I think we've had, just to repeat in case I missed anybody as they were coming in, any questions you have, you can pop in the chat once we go through the questions that have been submitted. I'll just open the floor to any kind of questions or discussion items you would like to have. If, for whatever reason you would like to submit a question anonymously, I do have that Google form pulled up, and let me share this link with you. So if there's something that you're not comfortable asking in person or putting in the chat, go ahead and submit it on this Google form. And I will still see it while we're sitting here talking. I just need to find my chat box again. And that is not it. Okay, so that is the link to the Google form. Again, this is if you'd like to ask something anonymously, please do. And sorry, I'm trying to get everything arranged here so I can keep eyes on all of these windows that I have open. The other thing I want to do, because I know I will forget otherwise, is with regard to the brewing process question, I'm going to try to, and I apologize, this might start playing for a second. I'm going to try to record something or have some kind of session for everyone who needs the brewing process, but I'm going to go ahead and share this, and I will share it in our Discord channel as well. But this is a brewing process overview that Master Cicerone Neil Whitty did a few months ago. It's aimed at preparing people for the Certified Beer Server exam, but it's going to be very good for the BJCP online entrance exam as well, in terms of covering the brewing process at a level at the kind of level that you'll need for the online entrance exam for BJCP. I will try to get something recorded or have another session. I'm just not sure right now in the immediate future when I would be able to schedule that. So I wanted to make sure that you all had a good resource. You've probably noticed when you're trying to learn about beer, there are a lot of people out there who think that they know about beer, and not all of them are correct in that thinking. Hopefully you don't think that about me, but this is one of those resources that, anything the Cicerone program puts out is going to give you good information and you can rely on it. So I wanted to do that before I forgot. And let me get in to some of your questions. So the first one I received is about the difference between finish and aftertaste? And this is a really great question. And I was doing some research into like making sure that I was going to be able to explain it in a way that makes sense, because as you know, as you judge, there are things that you think you understand until somebody asks you to explain it, and then it's kind of hard to put into words. So when we're talking about finish and aftertaste, those are two different things. In the beer world, they are two different things. In some of the research I was doing, it seems like in the wine world, there's quite a bit of overlap, and it may seem like the terms are interchangeable. I don't know that much about wine tasting and wine sensory, but most of what I saw was generally like, oh yeah, finish and aftertaste are the same thing with wine. That's not the case with beer. So when we're talking about finish and aftertaste in regards to tasting beer, the finish is going to be, and I'm trying not to be tautological about this and say the finish is the finish, but when you're drinking the beer and you've finished that sip, what is your immediate reaction to that? So when we're talking about something that has a dry finish, that's going to generally mean that it doesn't have very many residual sugars left over in it. And so your mouth will be dry. In terms of, you won't have that perception of sweetness on your palate. Then with aftertaste, that's going to be whatever's lingering after a few seconds. And there is some degree of overlap between the two. But I can give you an example. The other day, I tried a stout that had been aged in an oak barrel, and the finish was fairly dry, but the aftertaste is where a lot of the tannins from that barrel came through. And tannins are, and not to go down like the bitterness versus astringency road, but tannins are astringent, and they have that effect of doing like a very long, slow drying out of your palate. So the finish was, I would say like medium dry, because of the like all the residual sugars and things in the stout, but then those tannins from the oak, as you stopped sipping, you could still feel those tannins on your palate, and that's more of the aftertaste. So I hope that is helpful. Generally, you're not going to have a dry finish with like a sweet aftertaste, right? The aftertaste generally is going to reflect what the finish is. If you have something like a barrel character, that may take a few seconds to really show up on your palate, but the finish is going to be what you detect as soon as you have ended that drink, and then the aftertaste is going to be what comes after. Which I realized I gave you a definition by using the word in the definition, and I was really trying not to do that, but hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so let me see here. We've got a couple of questions. So one of the questions that I received is about the side-by-sides, and I know that throughout I've done several suggestions of do these side-by-sides. So I've been thinking about this, and what I will do this week is get a list together of what I would recommend to do some of those side-by-sides. And I know I've mentioned them throughout, so I may just have to go back and like listen to all of them to make sure that I capture them. But generally, off the top of my head, if we're talking about beers that are good to do side-by-sides, I think that for the tasting exam and for if anybody's doing the certified Cicerone tasting exam, one really good one to do is the American wheat, Hefeweizen, and wit beer. Do those side by side because they are all three wheat beers, right? They all heavily feature wheat. That is what they're known for. But with your American wheat, you're going to get much more of a highlight on the American hops, as well as a good counterpoint to the wit beer and the Hefeweizen with having a clean fermenting American yeast, a classic American style yeast. Then with your Hefeweizen, you're going to have that banana clove flavor that is, you know, distinct. It is the hallmark of a Hefeweizen beer. And then with a wit beer, you're going to have the spice that you're going to taste in a wit beer is going to come from spice additions rather than like a Hefeweizen, the spice character is going to come from the yeast character. So, and then of course with an American wheat, you wouldn't expect to get any kind of spice at all. So that's always a really good one, and or at least I think it's a good one, because when I was first taking the certified Cicerone exam, I think I've mentioned this before, I had absolutely no business taking the exam. I definitely didn't have any business taking the tasting exam. I walked in thinking I knew about beer because I drank beer, and that was absolutely not the case. And I remember missing on the style discrimination, you know, is this a Hefeweizen or an American wheat? And if I had done a side-by-side, that would have been really obvious, right? Because the Hefeweizen is going to have that banana and clove flavor. And if it's not there, it's not a Hefeweizen. So that's a really good trio to be able to taste the differences between really different, the things that different regions are known for in terms of brewing. That's a really good way to kind of learn those differences. Some other ones that I think are good is doing something like an American blonde ale, if you can find a Belgian blonde ale, and then I would say like a Munich Helles. Those again are, you know, 3 to do side by side. That's going to give you an idea, and we've talked about this throughout the different regions, how many beer styles developed as a way to kind of win customers over from those mass-produced lagers that most of the world still drinks. And that's a really great way to learn, you know, see like the similar ingredients, but with a completely different yeast strain. And that helps you pick up on some of the subtleties between a Belgian yeast strain, an American yeast strain, and a German lager strain. So I could rattle off a bunch, but I would go down probably a weird rabbit hole. So I will try to put together some good matches for all of you to be able to try side by sides to learn the differences between, you know, an ale yeast versus a lager yeast, or an English beer versus a Belgian beer. So that way you can sit down with a pair of beers and either taste them blind or understand what each one of them is when you're going in, to really help you hone in on those differences between ingredients, you know, fermentation styles, and different brewing regions. So I'll work on that and get something a little more comprehensive to you. So then the other question, comparisons of beers that are biscuity with ones that are crackery and ones that are bready. This one, I'll have to think about a little bit more. Generally, any beer that's going to feature a lot of Pilsner malt is going to give you that cracker flavor. So cracker flavor, Pilsner malt, that can be a Munich Helles, it can be a Belgian blonde ale, it could be, I'm trying to think of some other ones just off the top of my head that really feature Pilsner malt. Generally, any very pale beer is going to have Pilsner malt. That's where you're going to get that cracker flavor, as opposed to something that's biscuity. That's really, you're going to see that more in English beers. And the English malts tend to be a little more, have just a little bit more flavor when we're talking about their base malts and their pale malts. So and I'm pretty sure we've mentioned this, generally in the BJCP guidelines, when they're talking about biscuity, they're talking more about like the English biscuit as opposed to like the American South biscuit, right? So we're talking about more of like a digestive cracker or cookie, as opposed to like a Bojangles buttermilk biscuit. And then bready, anything that's going to have Vienna malt, Munich malt, those are going to give you more of the bready characters. But I feel like if I'll take a little bit more time and come up with a better list than that. Another way that is very, very helpful to be able to learn those differences in the malt, the base malt, and what those flavors are going to be, is to do a hot steep. And that, I'm trying to think, actually, I feel like Breeze has a video on YouTube that I can share. really learning the differences and intricacies between the different kinds of malt is not something that you are necessarily going to need to know for your BJCP tasting exam or really even your certified Cicerone exam. But I don't say that at all to discourage people from learning more about beer and honing your sensory skills. I just don't want anybody to think that those are the kinds of skills you're going to absolutely need. I would say, knowing those kinds of differences, that's where you're going for like a 90 on your tasting exam for the BJCP. But I do think that it's important to understand those differences and to really holistically understand the ingredients of beer. Let me share this. So if you're interested in doing a hot steep, Brice has this video on the hot steep method. It's not the most comprehensive, but it kind of gets you started. And then what I can do, I'll make a note of it. What I'll do is also share the ASBC method for doing hot steeps. Again, this is if you're really wanting to get into the nitty gritty of different malt flavors. It's not something that you need to like worry about doing before you go into your BJCP tasting exam or even your certified Cicerone tasting exam. But also, myself being from a malt background, I'm very partial to people wanting to learn the difference between malt flavors. So I'm going to make a note. So I will post a link to that so that way you all can find it if you're interested in doing hot steeps. And I will do the same thing actually for the hop teas. Those are really like, that's what I will do to really learn the differences between, even if we're talking about Pilsner malt. I've done hot steeps before where I'm using American Pilsner malt, German Pilsner malt, and Belgian Pilsner malt. And you wouldn't, like on paper, they all look very similar, right? All of the numbers are the same. You would be like, oh, these are pretty interchangeable. And then you do a hot steep and you see how different the flavors are, even if something looks the same on paper. So it's always a really good learning exercise. And I've done that with Pilsner malts, with pale ale malts, with caramel malts, and I learned something new every time. So I do think that it's a really good method. It can be kind of clunky to do it on your own, not impossible. I've done hot steeps and hop teas on my own before, but you can't really scale it the same way you can scale some other things. So if you're making a hot steep, you're making like 400 mils of wort basically, but it is absolutely still worth doing. Okay, then. Okay, so when completing the score sheets, how often will we use the descriptor definitions on the left? Is it more common than not that we would? No. So when you're using the descriptors on the left, so when we're talking about like acetaldehyde, estery, grassy, diacetyl, all of that, those checkboxes on the side are for when something is out of spec, either way. So you can have, let's say you have an English beer where a low level of diacetyl is acceptable. And you're getting, again, like that, like we've talked about, like when you think like, is this, I know a low level is acceptable, but is this too high? If it's a flaw, that's when you're going to use those on the left. So I have graded a round of tasting exams, and if people marked it because they picked it up in the beer, I didn't penalize them for it. But if somebody said this has acetaldehyde and they didn't check the acetaldehyde box, then and I say penalize, they lost like a half point on there. So it's not going to be the thing that like makes or breaks your tasting exam. But if it's out of spec, then make sure that you're checking it on the box. And you would do the same thing at a competition. If you're judging a beer and there's, and it is a flaw in the beer, that's when you're using the descriptors on the left. That being said, if you want to play it safe and, and check those, I don't think that you're going to get penalized for doing so. Okay, so a couple of questions about the, let me see. Couple of questions about the tasting exam. And if we've got some time at the end, I will go kind of back through the slides that we did at the very beginning. But when taking the tasting for BJCP, do they tell you the style or do you have to memorize the style numbers as well? No, you do not have to memorize the style numbers. What they will do is, so you come in, you sit down for the tasting exam. You have 6 beers. Every 15 minutes, they bring out a new beer. You don't have to, this is a little off topic, but we're still talking about the anatomy of the tasting exam. You don't have to stop what you're doing and grade the next beer, but generally speaking, you want to be finished with the beer that you're judging by the time they bring out the next beer. So you're generally speaking 15 minutes per score sheet. That's also why the practice score sheets can be really important, because you can time yourself and get an idea for how quickly 15 minutes can go by. So what they'll do when they bring it out is they will say, this is, I don't even know the category numbers, so I will look one up so I can give you a proper example, but they will say, beer number 1 is 1B American Lager. And you write down American Lager, you write down 1B. If you miss it the first time, you don't have to worry, because everybody else will have missed it and people ask like 10 times what the style was. So those are knowns. They will tell you the style number, they will tell you the beer style. Then your task is to determine if the beer in front of you is a good example of 1B American Lager. And if it's not, why is it not? But you will know what the style purports to be. And you don't have to know category numbers. Okay. Can you discuss the anatomy of the BJCP tasting exam? What can we expect at the exam? So I'll walk through, you're walking in the door and sitting down and taking the exam. And then, like I said, at the end, if we've got some time, I can kind of walk through how it's going to be scored so you have an idea. But for me, I know that just understanding, taking away as many of the unknowns as possible is incredibly helpful. So with the BJCP tasting exam, again, you'll have 90 minutes. You'll have 6 beers that you will fill out a complete score sheet for by the end of the session. So they bring out the beers at 15-minute intervals, and they will tell you the style and the style number. And that's really about it. So they'll come out and say, 1B American Lager, you've got the sample, you can start assessing it and filling out your score sheet. Again, generally, try to have your score sheet finished within 15 minutes by the time they bring that next sample around. And I know what has happened with me consistently is like, first sample comes out, boom, I'm done in 15 minutes. I'm doing great. Second sample comes out and I'm like, I finished early the last time so I can be more verbose this time. And then like, I'm not even finished and here comes the third sample, right? And then it's like, oh shit, now I'm behind a little bit. And then I end up being able to catch back up. But really try practicing, filling out your score sheet, setting that timer for 15 minutes and getting used to completing a score sheet within 15 minutes. Then at the end of the exam, well, and I'll back up. When you get there, you get all of your score sheets, all of the paperwork. They should have mechanical pencils there for you. You can use a 4-function calculator to be able to add up your scores. And I think mine is in my backpack. I had to stop on my way to one of the tasting exams and buy a 4-function calculator because simple math can get real hard, especially when you're under a time crunch. And on one of the sets of exams I just graded, somebody had completed the score sheet but added up their scores wrong. Again, it's like a point if you didn't add up everything correctly, but that's, that's one additional point that you could get for that. So you will be able to have a 4-function calculator. You will not be able to have your phone. You won't have any materials with you. They will have mechanical pencils for you. and they'll give you all of your score sheets. So then at the end of the exam, they'll collect all the score sheets. The exam administrator is the person who's giving the exam. The proctors, confusingly, are judges who are taking the exam, but they are, I believe they have access to the BJCP guidelines, but they don't know anything about the beers. So they're learning about the beers at the same time all of you are when you're taking your exam. And so the proctors will complete score sheets for each one of the beers. And then after the exam concludes, they will discuss amongst themselves each one of the beers and come up with a consensus score. And what that consensus score does is when they, and this is an automatic process, when they are looking at your scores, they compare your score to the proctor score. And you're awarded a number of points based off of how close or how far away you are from the proctor's consensus score. So I think the most points, I'll just pull this up so I don't misspeak, but they also put a bottom to the number of points that they will deduct. So if you say, let's say you give this beer an 18 and the judge's consensus or the proctor's consensus score is like a 45, you're only going to be docked, I think it's like 9 points at most. So they won't continue to subtract if you're way off on your scoring, which is good because I've been in tasting exams before where like the head proctor was way off on the score that they assigned something, and the consensus score reflected reality a little bit better. And then there's also kind of a safety set into that when they're looking at the proctor's scores, is they're not gospel, they're not set in stone. So if, let's say, the proctors gave a beer again like a 40 and everybody else gave it a 20, and they're looking at the feedback, at how what the descriptions are, and they're also looking at the information that the administrator supplied, then they may say like, yeah, the proctors were way wrong. So there is an additional check there that, if somebody's like totally off the rails, then they will adjust the scores accordingly. So one of the things that they did recently, again, this is one of those things that nobody asked me how I felt about it, but generally at the end of the tasting exams, the proctors would tell you what their consensus scores were for each beer. They have since stopped doing that, which I think takes away a very necessary layer of transparency and accountability in terms of when you leave, you have a better idea, at least of that one part, on how you did. I don't know if that was just that one particular exam or if that's the BJCP policy, but I have let my concerns about that be known to them, and they have neglected to email me back about that. But so Emma, I see your comment about worrying about your proctor score or your scores being way off from the proctors. That absolutely has happened to me. That just happened to me on my last tasting exam that I took, where I had very, very high scores on all of my descriptions, and I just completely messed up my scoring. So it happens to me too. And it was really tough to look at the scoring grid where they're giving you like, all of my descriptors are like, master level. And then it's like apprentice for scoring. And that really hurts my ego. But the most important thing though, is that I was taking it to be able to make sure that I was good with my descriptors, and I was. So that's the lesson I'm choosing to take from that. But again, even if your scores are way off from the proctors, you're not going to lose more than 9 points for that. And let me double check that it's 9 points. Yes, you cannot get fewer than 9 points on the scoring accuracy, no matter how far off you are. So that is one of those, another good check that they have built in, where if you're way off, that's not going to destroy your score. So then at the conclusion of the exam, they will take all of your score sheets. Within a couple of weeks, the exam administrator will send you a PDF copy of your score sheets. The originals get sent to the BJCP, and it will take, I think for this last one, so it will take a long time to get your results back. And this last time I took my exam at the beginning of April, and I think it was like mid-July when I got my scores back, which was pretty quick for generally what my experience has been. So, you know, it can take like 5 months at sometimes. So you are going to be waiting for a very long time for your scores. So it's one of those things where you take the exam and then forget that you took the exam until you get your email a few months later telling you how you did. And, you know, after going through my first round of grading exams, I had a friend who had done grading and was like, I was not expecting how much time it took. And I mean, it takes a good 40 hours to grade a set of exams, at least. And that's like your first pass at the grading the tasting exam. So I understand why it takes a while. So while you're waiting for your results, you can't sit for another exam, which is also very frustrating. And I know has definitely put a, you know, a hurdle in my path of needing to wait, because you wait. And again, it's not intentional, right? They're not doing it to anybody, but you have to wait just long enough that you really kind of forget everything that you had studied. And then you also have to try to find another exam when you do get your results. So just know it's going to take a while. Know that if you're in the Southeast, I will try to schedule exams on a fairly consistent basis. So, you know, starting next year, I'll probably do a couple more exams. And there are exam administrators in different areas that do consistently schedule exams for people because there's enough of a demand for it. So will the examples be more commercial, or could they be craft examples? This is a good question. Out of the 6 beers, the BJCP does not want exam administrators to use more than 3 that are commercial examples. The other 3 will be homebrew. So that is up to 3. I think the last one that I did, I think was all homebrew, but I've also done them where a couple of them are commercial examples. So that's good and bad, right? It's good because generally speaking, when you're judging, you're going to be judging homebrew. And I say this as a homebrewer, there are a lot of like not quite versions of homebrew out there. So homebrew offers you a very good opportunity to work through what's not quite perfect about it and then why, and leaving that feedback. With commercial examples, you know, it's going to be more than likely, it's going to be like a 40-45. Hopefully a commercial example is a very good example of that style. So you should expect to not have more than 3 commercial examples on your exam. Most of it will be homebrew. Some of them can, I took one in Asheville. The proctors in Asheville get like really into doing different things to beer. So they'll be like, I left this keg on my back porch all through July and August, and you know, and then it's oxidized, and then I poured some Pilsner in it. Like some of them really get into mixing up the beers. And luckily that's really just like a couple of places that I've been where they've done that, and most people are like, this is a Flanders red, it's not my best Flanders red, but you know, it's pretty good, and you can decide why it's not perfect. So yeah, they will. And I know on my last tasting exam, I got docked for that pretty badly because I did have an American lager and I thought it was a pretty good example. And then after it was over and we were talking as a group, like without the proctors, but talking as a group through the different examples, everybody was like, oh, that was so bitter. That was way too bitter. You know, I tasted it and I'm like, son of a bitch, that is too bitter for an American lager. So it will be something like that. So when I'm talking about like mixing beers, like they're not taking like a stout and mixing it with a Pilsner, but it might be like an imperial stout that, well, that an imperial stout would be a bad example. Maybe it's like a a Kolsch where they poured like a bottle of blonde ale in it, like doing something that changes it just enough to make it not a good example of that style. They're not trying to trick you. What they're trying to do is, assess how good you are at judging the beer in front of you. And so, Emma, this actually leads into your question, because this is where I got tripped up on my exam, was getting really in my head about, well, the exam admin rules or guidelines say that one beer should be like a 45, one beer should be like an 18, 3 beers should be somewhere in the middle, and like one should be obviously flawed. So they provide a lot of guidelines for what the beers should be. And it's important to remember that you need to judge the beer in front of you. And I say this like now Jen talking to past Jen, who was like, well, this tastes pretty good. This must be the 45, unless this one's the 45. That's exactly where I got tripped up the last time I took the tasting exam. I knew it when I left, and I was so mad at myself. I do the same thing with Cicerone blind tastings. I talk myself out of a lot of correct decisions. So expect one beer under 25-ish points, one beer over 40 points, and the rest somewhere in between. Generally, yes. Make sure that you don't like rely on that and take that as dogma, because I've done it, and it's the administrators don't have to do it that way. Generally, they should. You should expect to have a beer that is flawed somehow. You should expect to have a very good example, and then yes, most of them will be somewhere in the middle. But don't like, and this, I know that this isn't what you're asking. Again, this is like now Jen giving past Jen advice. Don't try to think that like you're gaming and like this one tastes pretty good. Could this one be the really good one? Don't worry about that. Judge the beer in front of you. And let me see. Okay, so can you discuss the importance of offering good feedback on the score sheet and how best to do so? Where to put it and how much should we say? This is a very good one. In outside of so talking about outside of the exam, when you're at a competition, one thing that is extremely frustrating to me as a judge and as a homebrewer is when I don't get very good feedback. And I've judged with other judges before, like higher ranked judges who are like, I don't give feedback. They can read what I said and Google what they need to do to fix it. And I think that is super, super poor showmanship and like terrible as a judge, because people are paying money to get your feedback, to see what you think about their beer. So it's very important to leave feedback. And for me, going through BJCP, that was one of the things that helped me the absolute most about studying for the Cicerone exam, is when you're going through and judging a beer. And I understand not everybody on here is doing Cicerone, but it also helped make me a better brewer and just understand beer better. Because it's one thing to say this beer has acetaldehyde. It's another thing to then also be able to say, try these 3 solutions to fix that problem the next time. And that's where that like one page beer fault list the BJCP has is fantastic when you're a beginner. Like I said, I used to have it folded up and carry it around with me in my pocket when I went to exams, until I got more comfortable understanding like, oh, these are the things that might maybe causing acetaldehyde. So feedback is super important. I think is one of the most important things as a judge that we owe as like good stewards of being beer judges to people who enter their beers. Because another mistake a lot of people think is assuming that people are entering beers because they think it's the very best beer and they're going to win. That's generally how I enter beers. Like I fully expect when I enter a beer competition that they're going to be like, that's it, everybody, you can stop home brewing. Jen made the best homebrew ever. And that never happens. Like, but regardless of how many times that does not happen, I still think like, oh yeah, I'm going to get like first place in all these categories, and I'm going to end up with best of show, like first, second, and third, because these beers are so good. And that has never happened. So I do, though, gain valuable feedback on the score sheets, and I have to kind of get over my ego when I wasn't awarded all of the medals. And sometimes you do get bad feedback or you get bad score sheets, but generally speaking, it's a very good check on where you can improve your process. And there are also people who will enter their beers because they don't have that palate. They don't have that brewing knowledge to know what's wrong with their beer. They just know that something's not quite right. And they want people to judge it in a blind setting and give them feedback. And if any of you are members of homebrew clubs, I'm guilty of this as well. When somebody comes up and gives me their homebrew, even if it tastes terrible, I'm probably not going to tell them that it tastes terrible unless they specifically say, I would like for you to taste this because something's not right and I'm trying to figure out what it is. Generally, I'll sip it, I'll smile and say, if I were you, I'd be very proud of this beer, like something like that. That's like not me saying that it's a good example, but still like, good job, keep it up. So people recognize that and they'll enter their beers in competitions to get that candid feedback back. So it's really important, again, just as good stewards in the beer industry, to work on giving good feedback to people. So that's my sermon about feedback. So it is very important where you can offer it. You can really put feedback anywhere in the score sheet. I generally will put it in the overall impression, with the caveat that I don't put anything in the overall impression that I haven't already mentioned above. So let's say that I in the aroma, I say like I get some low diacetyl. In the flavor, I say I get high diacetyl, like that dominates the flavor. So then in the feedback, I can say, try these steps to get rid of diacetyl. So they're not seeing diacetyl for the first time in the overall impression. They've seen me comment throughout. I've also seen score sheets where people will say, there's like maybe in the flavor section, they'll say, I get some diacetyl, try this with. Actually, diacetyl is not a great example of that because that's one of those things where it isn't something that only affects like the aroma or the flavor. So let's say that I have carbonation is a good one. If something is not the correct carbonation level, I'll leave that feedback right there in that mouthfeel and say, like low carbonation should be high for the style. So like make sure if you're force carbonating that you're getting, the correct carbonation levels. That's where I would put it in there. And then maybe comment again in the overall impression, like, hey, just get your carbonation up. Really leave it anywhere that makes sense, but generally what you're going to find is it makes the most sense to leave it in the overall impression. And how much should you say? I have had, and I don't have a score sheet next to me, but I know at the National Homebrew Competition this year, we had like shortened forms. And every single one of my like score sheets, I was like, I used up the lines that they gave me. And then I was trying to like squeeze in more underneath because I like to give a lot of feedback. So generally say as much as you need to say to cover it. It doesn't usually need to be very verbose. The other thing I will say about feedback that's super important that the BJCP is very sensitive about is not making assumptions about the brewing process. And I know a couple of you have sent score sheets, practice score sheets where that's been my feedback of like, yes, what you're saying is correct. Maybe change the language a little bit so it says like you may want to check instead of make sure that you're doing this. And that maybe is a distinction without a difference a lot of times, but making sure you're not making assumptions about anything in the brewing process or the brewing ingredients. So let's say we're talking about diacetyl. Diacetyl, acetaldehyde, those are the two most common things you will find in any beer competition that you judge, which it doesn't make sense. It shouldn't be there, but a lot of times in competitions, and you'll learn this the more you judge, you can taste when somebody has rushed their beer to get it shipped in time to get to the competition, because I've left a lot of feedback that's like, hey, the recipe seems great. It seems like you've got a good handle on it, but you needed to give it like 2 more days. But something like diacetyl, let's say, in my feedback, I would say I've got, I got diacetyl in the aroma, in the flavor. Make sure you're using a healthy yeast strain. Make sure you're fermenting in the proper temperature. Make sure you're giving the beer enough time on the yeast so it can clean anything up. So I will give, here are all, or not all, but here are most of the reasons why this may be happening in your beer. I would say like 90% of the time it's because they rush their fermentation, or we'll see, there I go. I'm making assumptions about their brewing process. They rush their fermentation, or they didn't use a healthy yeast strain, or they didn't have proper fermentation temperature. A lot of what you're going to see is going to be fermentation related, because with home brewing, and speaking about home brewing specifically, but also craft brewing a little more generally, the quality of the ingredients has vastly improved over the last few years. I remember talking to homebrewers who brewed in the 90s who had their hops came in like a pink brick that I've never actually seen in real life, but it's not even like hops. It just came in like this weird pink brick because nobody was homebrewing, nobody was craft brewing. Anheuser-Busch and Miller Coors and Molson had they were growing all of their own ingredients, so there weren't ingredients on the marketplace. But the quality of ingredients has vastly improved over the past several years. So you're really not going to get like a lot of defects because the ingredients aren't great. There are exceptions to that, but generally speaking, like fermentation is really kind of that last bastion of what homebrewers and brewers can 100% control. So that's why you see a lot of the fermentation issues when you're judging. That was kind of a weird rabbit hole to go down for all of you, but the feedback is incredibly important. It's something that, in case you can't tell, as a judge, I take very seriously, and I get very frustrated when I'm with fellow judges who don't think it's important or who don't give very good feedback. So I don't see, if anybody has any other questions, you can put them in the chat. Or in the Google form. I've seen those come through. Let me check here. Okay. The other question I know that I saw is about the online test, and that's another one that I'm going to follow up with you all about, because it's been several years since I've taken the online exam, and I know, just candidly speaking with friends who, like I have a very good friend who is also an advanced Cicerone who was just now able to pass the BJCP online exam because the questions aren't written very well. But like I said, it's been a very long time since I've taken it. One resource that I would point you to is on the website. Let me find it. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just link directly in here. The BJCP exam for dummies by Al Boyce is going to be a very good resource for you for this. And that is linked in the members area of the website, but I'll put it in the chat here so you can have it without going to the website. This exam for dummies that he has written is incredibly helpful. I used it for my written exam, and between the time I took the written exam and then found this BJCP exam for dummies guide, and then the next time I took it, I think I increased my written score by like 10, 12 points. So it's very helpful. And I know that he addresses the online entrance exam in there. I remember though, I think the only thing that gave me pause on this was I wasn't quite sure in looking at his guidance on the online exam if it accurately reflected the 2015 BJCP guidelines. It seemed like it was a little more 2008 guidelines, but I'm not entirely certain. One thing not to sleep on with the online entrance exam is the BJCP program and ethics section. And I get it, they are very serious about making sure people understand the BJCP and how it works. And as somebody who missed moving up a level because she missed 2 true false questions on one of the written exams, is worth paying attention to because it can make a difference between being certified and being national. There is also in the members area, let me see if I have it right here. I don't have it. It's in the members area though. The study guide, the BJCP study guide that they put out has all of the information you need to know about the BJCP program. It also really, if you read through it, I would say read through that study exam or the study guide for the online exam, watch that, the Cicerone brewing process video, and between those two, you're going to be pretty well covered for taking the online exam. It is timed. One of the benefits for the BJCP exam that you don't have for the Cicerone entrance exam is they allow you to skip questions, and you can also flag questions, which just as a general test taking strategy is very effective. If you don't know a question, you can just hit the little red flag and move on, and it lets you go forward and backwards through the question. So with the Cicerone beer server exam, they don't let you do that. You have to answer the question in front of you. And then when you're finished with your exam, you can see all of your flagged questions up in the corner, and you can just click on it and it takes you right to whatever that question was. So just as a strategy, I would recommend going through, flagging anything that you don't know the answer to right away, answering the questions you do know the answer to. Since it is an online exam, it is open book, like any open book exam. If you don't know where to find the material, it's not really very helpful for you. So I do remember when I took mine, I had my guidelines next to me and I could go and look up questions that I had on question, or I could go look up answers to questions where I got stuck, or it was going to take me more than like a couple of seconds to answer the question. I would just flag it and move on, and then could go back and spend time, thinking and or looking up the questions that I had. So some of them, again, and I know I mentioned this at the very beginning, the online exam is written by, and I'm really not trying to denigrate anybody here, but it's written by people who don't understand the kind of the art and the science behind creating multiple choice exams. And they're like, I can write a multiple choice exam. So I know my friend who took the online exam said that one of the questions was like, which one of these beers is stronger? And she was like, stronger how? Like stronger at ABV, stronger in IBU? What are you asking? So I say that to say, if you are going through the exam and you aren't sure or you're not pleased with the score that you're getting, there is a very high likelihood that it's just very poorly written questions. So don't be too hard on yourself with that. I recommend purchasing the 3 attempts for $20 and purchase that, take it once and see how you do. If you pass, great, you're done. You don't have to worry about it anymore. If you don't pass, you have 2 more attempts to do it. So you can see, one, what it's like with the time limit and the questions, and then 2, where you need to study more. So I would recommend, I think it's $10 for 1 attempt or $20 for 3 attempts. Spend the extra $10. If you pass the first time, it was a $10 insurance policy, right? If you need to take it multiple times, that's totally fine. You will need to have passed the online exam before you're able to take the tasting exam. For those of you who are taking my tasting exam, I think you will get an email from me shortly, but probably about 10 days ahead of time is when I'm going to ask that you have passed the exam. And that's really for a couple of reasons. One, because then you'll pass the exam. You don't have to worry about it anymore. And you have, 10 additional days to study. 2, for both of the exams, there is a wait list. And for people who are on that wait list, I would like to be able to give them some notification ahead of time that they are able to take the exam. That is a secondary concern. My primary concern is that you all pass the online exam before you take the tasting exam, because I want all of you to be able to take the tasting exam. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already done the online exam, to go ahead, like Band-Aid method, write off, buy the three attempts for $20 and take it and see how you do and use that as your baseline, or you pass and then you don't have to worry about it ever again. So let me see. I thought I saw another question in here. Okay, yes. So they'll be looking for feedback on the tasting exam as well. Yes, I would concentrate on the feedback is important. If you can look at that fault sheet and kind of have an idea of what might be caused by what. The way I did it when I was taking the exam was, and this was before, like it was when I was, I was starting to learn kind of what was what, like what flavors were what, but I wasn't exactly sure on why. I rearranged them to be like, okay, temperature control. These are all the off flavors that could come from poor fermentation temperature control. Yeast viability. These are all of the off flavors that could happen because of unhealthy yeast. That's what worked for me, to really kind of learn, like, okay, if I get, again, like acetaldehyde, if I get that, then I should suggest healthy yeast, proper fermentation temperature. But that's one portion of the exam. So that's really, I don't want to prioritize different sections because they're all worth 20 points. But the feedback is really for, it's good to have it. It's great if you can do it the first time you take the exam. There are other areas where you can garner more points, and really honing in on that feedback is going to be it'll be great if you can go in the first time and you've got your feedback down. But if you don't, like, that's going to be the feedback portion. Those additional points are really going to put you more at like a national level. And I want everybody here to get as many points as you possibly can the first time you take the tasting exam. But don't not focus on other areas to the detriment of, of working on your feedback. Hopefully that made sense. Okay, how long will we have to take the second and third try if we have issues with the first attempt? So you can take the online exam once a day until you pass. So if you, let's say you take it tomorrow, you don't pass, you're not able to take it again until Wednesday, but you can take it once a day until you've passed. And then I think I think it's a year to be able to take all 3 attempts. At which point, if you haven't passed with those attempts within the year, then you have to purchase more attempts. Okay, so I'm going to give this one more refresh, make sure I haven't missed anything. And then what I'm going to do, I did not do that correctly. So sorry, give me a second. Okay, Sheena, perfect. This is what I'm trying to pull up right now, and I just messed it up on my computer. So what I'm going to do really quickly, and I don't want to get too bogged down in this. We've talked about this before, and I know that you all have seen this before. I promise that I'm getting there. Okay, so let's see. You all should be able to see my PowerPoint, correct? Nope, I just did that wrong. I will get it together. Sorry, give me a second. Okay, so we can see this. This is the beer judging exam overview. And I'll just quickly go through some of this. So, and you all have access to this. So there's 5 components to how your exam is going to be graded. Your scoring accuracy, which is what we talked about at the very beginning with the Proctor's consensus scores, your perception, your descriptive ability, your completeness and communication, and your feedback. So each section is worth a maximum of 20 points. The scoring accuracy and perception are going to compare your score sheets to the Proctor score sheets. So for example, when I was doing this last round of grading, I went through and as the grader, I didn't have to do the scoring accuracy. They have a rubric set up for that. So it's just automatic. It automatically calculates your points. And for the perception, I went through the Proctor's score sheets and the guidelines for the style and made a list of like 6 to 10 descriptors for whatever that sample was. So I would look at the Proctor score sheets, and for example, we had a Flanders Red Ale, and if 2 of them mentioned like dark fruit, I wrote dark fruit as a descriptor. Also because looking at the guidelines, I know that that's something that should be in there. So as the grader, you're kind of asking yourself, what are the things that make a Flanders Red Ale a Flanders Red Ale? And then finding that language in the Proctor score sheets. Then you also look through all of the score sheets of everybody who's taken the exam, if and that's an additional check, like in case, let's say with a Flanders Red Ale, none of the proctors mentioned anything about there being any acidity to it, but they didn't say that there wasn't. So I know that they all just missed the acidity, but all of the people taking the exam all said acidity. I would write acidity as one of those perceptions. Then I would compare those score sheets or the score sheets to whatever that list of perceptions was that I made. And generally speaking, if, let's say one proctor says spicy hops, one proctor says herbal hops, and one proctor says noble hops or spicy and herbal hops, then any of those I'm going to give credit to somebody if they say noble or spicy or herbal, right? So you won't be penalized if, your bready is the same as like a Proctor's fresh baked bread, something like that. So your scoring accuracy, your perception will compare your score sheets to the Proctor's. And then that's the end of it. So that's 40 points, right? The other 60 points are going to be independent of their score sheets and evaluate your individual abilities. So that's going to be descriptive ability, completeness and communication, and feedback. So I talked about this. Talked about perception, descriptive ability. So this is what we've been talking about when we're talking about the perceived characteristics, what kind and how much. And really, when you're going through and you're filling out your score sheet on your exam, if you can say what kind and also how much, you're going to get a lot of points for that. And there was particularly the how much, the intensity, was something that I was surprised about going through the score sheets by how few people would say, they may say roast and malt, coffee, chocolate, but they didn't say moderate or low or high. And the making sure that you're doing that how much part is really key to garnering some extra points in your descriptive ability. So here's a descriptive ability example. And I will also say when you're taking the tasting exam, generally speaking, they want you to be able to succeed, right? They want you to at least get recognized. The graders are going to help you get to that recognized level. So once you're recognized, you're a BJCP judge, you have your BJCP ID. So don't, when you're preparing for this, don't feel like it's a possibility for you to fail, because you're not going to fail the exam. They want you to be at least a recognized level. And even the exams I graded, I think the lowest we gave was a recognized. There were a couple of like apprentice scores, but overall, everyone got at least recognized. And that's not at all to say that like everybody gets a participation trophy, but as we go through the scoring, you'll see there are areas where you can really garner a lot of points that are going to help buffer against some of these other areas. But when we're talking about descriptive ability, and we've talked about this with descriptive language also, you already have the vocabulary the vocabulary. You already have the vocabulary to be to be very specific in what it is that you're saying. So the apprentice level would say hoppy aroma, recognized level, American hop aroma, certified level, there's that intensity, moderate American hop aroma, national, moderate citrusy American hop aroma, and the master level, moderate citrusy American hop aroma with notes of tangerine and pine needles. That master level is really where, as we've been going through the slides every week, we've already been doing that level of description for all of our beer styles. So it's really just a matter of when you're writing it down. If you find yourself writing something like American hop aroma, you know that it's American hop aroma. Why do you know that? What are you picking up on? Because you know that American hops are going to have citrus flavors, and what kind of citrus. So it's easy to push yourself to say, okay, I smelled it, I tasted it, I said American. Why am I saying American? And when you have that background knowledge of American hops are going to be citrus, they're going to be piney, they're going to be resinous, then it's really easy to drill down your descriptive ability and your descriptive language pretty quickly. So these, don't get too caught up in the rubrics, but generally speaking, when, again, so the descriptive ability is independent of anything that any of the proctors or any of the other people taking the exam say. If you can aim for 6 or so aroma adjectives, phrases, then that's going, for a master level, you want about 6. You want about 4 intensity levels. So already, moderate American citrusy hop character. That's probably like 3 right there. So just going back to our descriptive ability example, we've already been operating on that master level in terms of our descriptions. And it's fine when you get there and you're taking the exam. Obviously, you don't have the luxury of time to really drill down into very specific examples, but you do have the vocabulary and you do have that already ready to go. So I include these, like, don't get too bogged down in making sure you have the correct number of aroma and then intensity, but make sure that you are saying what kind, you are saying how much. The other thing I will say with your score sheets is at the top, it'll say, let's talk about appearance because that's one that I can remember off the top of my head. It says appearance, then the subheader says color, it says clarity, then it says head, retention, foam color, and texture, I think. So as you're going through your score sheets, use those subheaders that tell you, malt, bitterness, hops, fermentation characteristics, other aromatics, aftertaste, finish. They give you all of those things that they're looking for in the subheader of your score sheet. What I've done before is after I fill it out, I go and just make little quick check marks to make sure that I've covered everything that they're asking for. That goes a very, very long way. So the feedback, this bottom part, this is where to really focus your attention when we're talking about feedback to keep in mind. So if you're scoring anything below outstanding, which is 45 to 50, and it's very rare that you're going to get a beer on your exam or in the real world that's going to be, I think the highest I've ever seen is like a 46. And that was a very, very good beer. But if you're anything below outstanding, so let's say that it's outstanding, you don't need to give any suggestions for feedback. And I think intuitively this makes sense if you think about it. If you're telling somebody, this is not the best version of this that I've ever had, well, why? Right? Because there must be a reason, there must be something, and that's where the feedback comes in. So if it's excellent, you should aim to give at least 1 suggestion for improvement. If it's very good, at least 2 suggestions. If it's good, at least 3. If it's fair, at least 4. And if it's problematic, at least 5. The other thing that I will note about the scoring is that the BJCP sets the minimum score at 13. So you will never judge or you will never grade a beer below 13. That is especially true with your tasting exam. With competitions where you judge, they'll tell you what the minimum is. Most people will go with 13. Sometimes I've judged in competitions where they say the minimum is like a 20, which I personally, I don't think it's helpful for people to set the minimum at something, because as somebody who has gotten a 13 on a homebrew before, I didn't know if I actually got a 13 or if it should have been lower, and I would have appreciated having the actual score. I mean, it was still a bad beer, right? Like there was no saving that beer, but keep that in mind for your tasting exam. Don't grade any beer below a 13. But for the feedback, just keep this in mind generally. If it's not the very best beer you've ever had, you've tasted something that makes it not the very best beer you've ever had, and you need to give some kind of feedback for that. Okay. Feedback elements. So this is a part that I think is important to keep in mind since we're talking about feedback and the quality of feedback. When you're grading an exam, this is the rubric that the graders use to determine how many points you get for your feedback. So, number one, is it constructive, polite, and professional? Do you have at least one positive comment? That's really easy to do. And that is, in most cases, it will be like, oh, you can only see the title page. I'm so sorry. I'm here like flipping through all of these slides. Thank you, Emma, for pointing that out, and I am very sorry. Let me just try sharing this again. How is that? Okay, perfect. I'm really sorry about that. I'm just like sitting here cruising along through this thing. So let me go back to, okay, so I'm on the feedback rubric. So you have about 12 total points for your feedback. Constructive, polite, and professional, at least one positive comment or suggestion. This is a super easy point to get. Is easily on mine, on the overall impression, a lot of times it will just be something like, overall, a good start to the style. Done. Positive comment. It was constructive. It was polite. Is your feedback nice, basically? Is it consistent with the score assigned to the beer? So if you give the score a, I don't know, give the beer a like a 46, and then you're like, there's diacetyl, there's acetaldehyde. Well, that score doesn't match the feedback. Similarly, if you gave it a 35 and said, this was great, this is a great example, that doesn't match the feedback either. Accurate diagnosis of stylistic flaws, and then the accurate diagnosis of technical flaws. Both of those, when I was grading my exam, the senior grader told me that I was too hard on people for that. So I ended up bringing it back up a little bit, but that accurate diagnosis. So let's go back to the Flanders Red Ale example, and let's say that there was no acidity, and you said for a Flanders Red Ale, this is perfect. And you don't mention at all that there was no acidity when there should be acidity. That would not be an accurate diagnosis. Likewise, if you had a Flanders Red and you said there's too much acidity in this, a Flanders Red shouldn't have acidity, that's where, again, that's an inaccurate diagnosis. The accurate to characteristics perceived, independent of whether you are correct. So if you say that this Flanders Red Ale has acidity and a Flanders Red Ale should not have acidity, but then you also give feedback to say, make sure that you're practicing good cleaning procedures, and that way you won't get an infection, so you won't get these bacteria causing acidity. You would still get points for that because you're correct, even if your diagnosis is incorrect. Doesn't make assumptions about the process or the ingredients. If you say there's too much caramel malt, maybe there's too much caramel malt. Maybe it's under attenuated. There could be reasons why, like in that case, there's too much residual sweetness. So make sure that you're not making assumptions. Sometimes that can be remedied by just the language that you choose to use. Overall impression feedback is consistent with comments in other sections. So that's what I was saying earlier. with feedback that if I get diacetyl in the aroma and the flavor, by the time they get to the overall impression, when they see my suggestions for improvement to not have diacetyl in the beer, it's not a shock to them, right? So you've already kind of addressed what was wrong in the beer within there. So when you get to the overall impression, that's not the first time they're seeing that information. And then the characteristic observations are noted in the appropriate section of the score sheet. This can be, this is another like easy couple of points to get, because you're not talking about bitterness in the mouthfeel section. You're not talking about appearance in the aroma section, right? So everything is in the section that it's supposed to be in. You get 2 points for that. So the completeness and communication, this is the one that is the easiest way to get the maximum amount of points, because it's really bookkeeping. It's making sure that you have correctly written the beer style, you've correctly written the entry, the beer or entry number, you've correctly written your name or your participant number, because you will, it is graded blind, so you will have a participant number. You have a score for each section. You also have a score for overall. And then you have the appropriate checkboxes in the scoring guide, the stylistic accuracy and descriptor definitions. So we'll go through each one of these a little bit more in detail. When you, for most tasting exams, they will have already like pre-printed the, what did they have pre-printed last time? Most of it will already be done for you. And like, you'll just, if you can manage to write like your participant number, you get points for that. So with our 20 points for completeness and communications, and this is, Sheena, going back to your question about like, if you start to feel like you're getting in the weeds, if you can focus on making sure you have these, you can, this is where you can really get those extra, or not extra, but this is where you can get the most amount of points for the least amount of effort. So all applicable components of aroma are listed on the score sheet, are addressed. This again is where it is helpful to make sure that you're looking at the subheader for each section and making sure that you've talked about the malt and the hops and the fermentation character and whatever else they've listed. All applicable components of the appearance are listed. Flavor, mouthfeel. So again, if you're going through those little subheaders and you're answering all of those, you're providing, you know, your impressions of each one of those right there. You've got, that's 8 points out of 20. The overall impression section includes a comment on the overall drinking pleasure associated with the entry. And if the score is less than 45, offers at least one suggestion for improvement. So with these 2 points, the first one, like, and when we're talking about the overall drinking pleasure, it can also be, this was hard to drink, right? That is an overall, the overall drinking pleasure was that it was not good. As long as it's, you know, polite and constructive, that is perfectly fine. Feedback, assuming that you're following it up with, you know, with here's how you can improve it. And then offers at least one suggestion for improvement. So that's 1 point. That does not have to be necessarily correct suggestion for improvement. It's that you have a suggestion for improvement there. So then these are the ones that are so ridiculously easy to get. And I feel like they added these. I don't have insight into how they decided to do these, but I feel like they added them to, again, help people get those additional points so everybody can at least get a recognized score. And that's not a guarantee that everybody gets a recognized score, but the efficient use of vertical space. So you have fewer than 2 blank lines remaining on the completed score sheet. And that is literally going through each section and did you fill up each line? Generally speaking, like mouthfeel and appearance, that's probably where you won't fill up all of the lines, and that's fine. Numerical values. You've gone through and you've given each section a score, and then you also have a total score. And I have seen score sheets where people have run out of time and they don't have the scores on there. You lose 2 points for that. So if that happens, like that's not, it's 2 points lost, but it's, you know, it's not the end of the world if the exam ends and you haven't had time to fill in those scores. The stylistic accuracy, technical merit, and intangible boxes are checked. Those are the boxes at the very bottom. Check those. And, you know, when I grade exams, I If somebody has them checked, that's a point. I don't go and look and see how they checked them and say, well, they said that the stylistic accuracy was 4 out of 5, but up here it seems like it should have been a 3 out of 5. No, I just check and make sure that you have checked those 3 boxes, you get a point. Comments are well organized and legible. Again, write neatly, don't use cursive, print, make it easy for people to read your score sheets. You get a point for that. Efficient use of horizontal space, you get a point for that. So they talk about it in the study guide, that efficient use of horizontal space, I think is something like you have at least 6 words per line. They lay it out. So basically you can't be like high roasted malt, low, moderate, American hops, and then you filled up all of the space, right? So the efficient use of horizontal space, I think they say like 6 to 7 words per line is one point. And as long as somebody didn't, like there were, I've seen score sheets where people have done like one thing per line. It's like, okay, well, that's not, you're not using the space efficiently. So you've lost a point for that. But this completeness and communication is all things that, you know, these are the easiest points that you can possibly get on the exam. So if you feel like you're starting to get in the weeds a little bit, make sure you have numbers assigned, make sure you've checked those boxes, and then the rest of it, you know, writing neatly and using your space wisely is going to get you, how many points is that? That's like 2, 4, that's like 14 points. Don't judge me if I didn't get that right. Math has been very difficult for me today, but you will get the majority of the points for just filling out the score sheet. And okay, so then the last thing on here, we've talked about all of this. Make it a goal to be completely finished before completing your score sheet for the previous beer, before the next beer is served. Make it a goal. It's fine if you don't. Like I said, I've been in exams where sometimes I finish a little bit early, sometimes I go a little bit over, but generally speaking, everything is, you know, I'm moving along at that 15 minutes per beer on average. And your exam administrator will also say like, hey, there's 5 minutes left. So, you know, so if you complete your score sheet or the exam before the time is up, make sure each subsection has a score, make sure the total score is written and correct, make sure that stylistic accuracy grid is completed, and make sure that all of your header info is correct. Write neatly rather than cursive, make sure that your answers are legible and the erasures are complete. And let me see, I know we've got just a couple of minutes left here, but we went over this like our very first week. So that is in the members area and also on the YouTube channel. So let me see. I see we've got a couple, I think. Okay. I'm judging for the first time this weekend in Charlotte. What should I plan to bring with me? That's a good question. So with the US Open specifically, as somebody who used to be in the Carolina Brewmasters, the US Open was my very first competition that I've judged, and I had a fantastic, a super positive judging experience, which is not what you asked, but I had a super positive judging experience with another judge who was a woman. And I really think if I hadn't have had that experience with some of the experiences I had after that, I probably wouldn't have kept judging. So hopefully when everybody goes in to judge for their first time, they also have a positive experience. But what should you plan to bring with you? Really, the competition should supply a hard copy of the guidelines. They should have mechanical pencils. They should have flashlights, staplers, erasers. They really should be able to provide you with everything that you're going to need. However, I would make sure that you have the BJCP app on your phone. Generally, that's what most places use now. They rely on their judges to have the app on your phone, on your tablet, on whatever. They should have hard copies available, but generally speaking, most people just use the app on their phone. I like to bring my own mechanical pencils because they should have them there. That's not always a guarantee. At the US Open, I would imagine that it would be. partially because my husband used to organize the competition and we had to buy like a buttload of mechanical pencils. And I can't imagine that those have all disappeared by now. So they should have mechanical pencils. And then they will have the pre-printed labels for you with, you know, your name, if you've got a judge ID, and your email address. So you can just sit down and start putting those on your score sheets. So really, you don't need to plan. You don't have to bring anything with you. I like to have my own water. I like to have my own pencils, or at least one pencil, because I have been at competitions before where there aren't pencils on the table. And that also mechanical pencil, not wooden pencil. The wood shavings can affect your aroma. So mechanical pencil. And some judges will actually have, I've never done this myself, but I think that I definitely think it can be a great idea. They will actually have a binder of their own, their judging binder, where they have a hard copy of the BJCP guidelines. They have that beer fault list. They may have like past exam or past competitions that had the pre-printed labels. They may have some of those like extras that they can use. And then I'm trying to think of what other things they have, but most, like I've seen a handful of judges who have their judging binder that they bring with them to competitions. You don't have to have that, but I do think, you know, it definitely doesn't hurt anything to have that. Let me see. The minimum number you have to have right on the online score to pass, I think you have to have a 60% or higher. I will double check that, but that's what jumps out to me as being what the passing score is a 60% or higher. It is not prohibitively high. It's not like you need to have like a 90% or anything like that. Okay. I'm judging at the California Craft Brewers Cup tomorrow, and they gave me a PDF sheet of pre-filled address labels with my info that I'm assuming I should print at home to bring. That is really interesting, Emma. I've never heard of anybody doing that. Yeah, I'm not sure. That's because I would think that like not everybody has pre-printed or has like the Avery address labels to do. That may be worth just emailing them and asking if they expect you to do that or if they're going to provide them for you. That's really interesting. I've never heard of somebody doing that. Worst case scenario, if you're not able to print them before tomorrow, or if they don't have them ready for you, the score sheet is still the score sheet, and you can just handwrite your information on there. I've been in plenty of competitions where they don't do the pre-printed labels. It's fine to handwrite, like it's a little bit more writing, but that option is also available. And okay, so let me see. Yes, tap the glass to get rid of any bubbles. That's good. And let me double check here. So if anybody else, I know we're a little bit over time. If anybody's got any other last minute questions that you would like to add, you can pop them into the chat. Oh, thank you, Emily. Thank you for that. Yeah, so today is our second anniversary for the podcast I do with my friend Rachel, False Bottom Girls. And that seems like a lot longer and a lot shorter amount of time. Yeah, Sheena, do not drink coffee or eat super intense foods prior to testing or judging. One of the things, generally speaking, and this is my personal experience, is neither right nor wrong, is what works for me. If I tend to be more distracted if I'm hungry. I can only think about how hungry I am. So I will generally follow like my same routine before a tasting exam, even before like a Cicerone tasting exam. Also with coffee, I drink coffee every morning. So I will drink coffee before I go to judge. But generally speaking, by the time I get there and the time we actually start judging, you want to give about 30 minutes or so between eating, drinking, smoking, doing anything like that. Your palate should more or less reset. But yeah, the super intense foods is a big thing. Don't eat something super spicy. Don't, yeah, gum or brushing the teeth is good. I know like the first couple of times I went into judging, I was very serious about like, I'm I hope nobody yells at me because they saw me drink coffee as I walked in, and like you go in and they've got like the Dunkin' Donuts like pitcher, the cardboard things, and everybody's like eating donuts and like bananas, or they've got like somebody brought like some like breakfast casserole. Excuse me. So those rules are fairly lax for competitions. For your tasting exams, yeah, I would say like aim to come in with a fairly clean palate, understanding that by the time you start, you're probably going to have, your palate's going to generally be reset. And if you, for me, again, not drinking coffee would be far more disruptive to the judging process or the testing process to me than not drinking coffee or just doing my regular routine would be. But I also, going into exams, you've got some time before you start tasting for that to reset. So with that, I know we're about 5 minutes over, but thank you everyone for joining tonight. Thank you for your questions. These were great questions. I can't believe that it's been 14 weeks. And this is, as I mentioned in our newsletter, this is definitely not the end. Like our community doesn't end tonight. So you're free to, continue reaching out on the website, email, social media. However, I'm available to all of you. I continue to be available to all of you. And I think that I've had enough people ask again. You've all gone through this together, especially those of you who are here tonight. But we will probably do this exam kind of training again in the future because I know some people aren't able to make it. But yes, the Discord will stay active. The members area will stay active. If for some reason either of those things change, I will give you enough advance notice. But yeah, Discord is going to stay open. I encourage everyone to keep using it because I think it's very helpful for everyone to share their experiences and ask questions and be able to encourage each other and like share opportunities and stuff. So that's definitely going to stay open. Yes, you can still continue to submit sample score sheets. And yeah, I mean, I think that will probably be at a certain point. What I'll probably do is just switch it to where you can email them to me because I want to make sure that I don't forget that I have that form open and people are submitting score sheets and I forget to check it. But yeah, you can definitely continue to submit score sheets. All of you who are judging this upcoming week, I would love to hear how it goes for you. I would also love if you can share that in our Discord group because it's very helpful to see people. I will say for those of you who are judging in Charlotte this weekend, one of my good friends is the one who's organizing the exam or organizing the competition. And he sent me a message and said, hey, can you tell me who is taking your exam, who's also doing the training, because they had more judges than they needed. And he was like, I want to make sure that the women who are doing this training, who have been doing the training and who are taking the exam, get to sit at the judging table and get that experience. Yeah, right? So I think he said there were like 6, I think, between the Charlotte exam and the Atlanta exam. So I am very excited to hear how all of you do, because if you signed up to judge or steward, chances are you're going to be judging, and they wanted to make sure that you had that opportunity. So with that, I will let you all go. I'll repeat again, I'm still available for any kinds of questions or advice or guidance you need. Please share your experiences in the Discord channel because I think that can also help encourage other people to kind of get over that hurdle of the intimidation of signing up. So thank you, everyone. And I guess I won't see you next week, but I will see all of you around. I'm so excited to see what you do in the beer judging world.
Thanks, Jen.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone. See ya.
Bye, Jen.
Bye.